In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan chats with Dr. Stefanie Johnson, director of the University of Colorado Boulder's Center for Leadership and associate professor at CU Boulder's Leeds School of Business, to dive into her valuable insights on leadership and management. Stefanie's role with the Center for Leadership is aimed at fostering the next generation of leaders. With a strong commitment to advancing the field, Stefanie has secured federal and other grant funding to support her extensive research on leadership dynamics. She has also pioneered several innovative leadership development programs at CU aimed at fostering the next generation of leaders. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Well, Stefanie, welcome.
Thanks, Dan.
This is awesome. Well, for certain. And I'm going to start with something that's sort of current day for you, and that is tell us about the Leadership Institute at CU. What's that all about? When did it come to be? Where are you taking it? Tell us about that, and then we'll go backwards in time and find out how you got there, and we'll go forwards in time as well. But let's start there.
Oh, very cool. Thanks for asking. So the Center for Leadership at the University of Colorado is a campus-wide center aimed at elevating leadership across the university.
And what does the word center mean in the context of the collegiate world?
Yeah, I would say it's an academic designation for sort of what happens in the unit in a center. And their overall budget model differentiates a center from an institute. Most centers are within an academic college. So, at the Leeds School of Business, which you're very familiar with, we have centers like the Centers for Ethics and Social Responsibility. It lives in Leeds.
Yep.
Our center doesn't live in any college. So we report to the chancellor at the University of Colorado. And the reason for that is we are really trying to support student leader development across the entire CU campus, ecosystem, whatever you want to say. We have this founding philosophy that leadership's within us all. And we, Time Magazine looked at the top leader generating universities across the country, and CU Boulder was one of those universities.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's based on—
When was that?
It was just this year. So in 2024, they came out with their list. It's the first time they've done it. And they looked at prominent leaders, in government, in the arts, in businesses. And then they looked at their alma maters and then, adjusted all their magical statistics for how many students are there, because some schools are smaller than others.
Yep.
And most of all of the schools that were on that list are like Ivy League schools, and then kind of the public Ivies, including, I don't know if people count CU Boulder as a public Ivy, but including CU Boulder. So we have a really long history of shaping tomorrow's leaders. And so Chancellor DeStefano, when he was still chancellor, had this vision for what if we really invested in this and made CU just a place for anyone to go who wants to really dive into and lean into their leadership. So that's what we do.
So the students who are part of that, what do you do with them? How do you help them develop their leadership capabilities?
Yeah. So I guess I'll say two ways. One, we work with students directly. And when we work with a student, we try to expose them to opportunities that are going to help them grow. So using evidence-based practice, that's a really vague answer, but we do things like outdoor experiential leadership activities that push people to their boundaries. I don't know if you've ever done anything like we do river trips and the students fly.
I was
off
too
their
busy
raft.
working to do that kind of stuff. Although when I look back now, I'm like, why did I ever go do stuff like that?
Well, you can do it now. We'll take you on the river. And then we do executive coaching. So if you ever had a coach, we hire ICF, which is the International Coaching Federation, coaches, and they work with the student over the course of a year to help them, make sense of feedback they're getting, develop as leaders. We have courses so people can take classes for credit.
Yep.
I don't think that's always the best way to learn leadership. Like you learned leadership in the wild, right?
Yes.
You're like, oh, guess what? I'm running this huge company. And so I think that's really where most of leadership is developed, is through action, but it can't hurt to learn some of the theories and self-awareness that we try to integrate into our classes. So that's all one bundle. It's like we work with students. We have a big mentoring program. The Boulder CU Leadership Program is what it's called. You should be a mentor. I can imagine how excited a student would be to have you as their mentor. We actually just had a big kickoff last night for that event. And And so some of it's developmental relationships, all that. But those are all things that we do directly with students.
Mhm.
That being said, I think what makes the Center for Leadership really unique is we recognize that right now we have 40 something affiliate leadership programs on campus. So
Okay.
I mentioned CSER, the Center for Ethics and Social Responsibility. They teach classes like leadership challenges. They do a ton around student leader development. The President's Leadership class is the probably longest standing leadership program on campus. There's engineering leadership program. There's just ROTC, Naval ROTC.
So in one of my earlier podcasts that's already been dropped is with my former professor, Professor Steve Kaplan from University of Chicago, who, when I went there, he was a professor of finance, and he still is. He's still and at this point, world renowned for what he's done in finance. Yeah. But he's also world renowned for what he's done with entrepreneurship. I mean, he's pretty much led the charge with the University of Chicago when it wasn't known at all for entrepreneurship to what it is today.
Yeah.
There's actually more of the MBA students who have a concentration on entrepreneurship than in finance. For University of Chicago, that's like crazy. But one of the things he did with a couple other professors from different schools is published work on what characteristics make for a strong CEO versus a strong CFO.
Okay.
So, and they did it, it was a data-driven exercise, meaning that they had this vast database that included, I'm going to oversimplify, two main elements. One is how well did the CEO do as a CEO? And then independent of that, kind of data from a management coaching firm that would interview prospective CEO candidates and collect all kinds of data.
Sure.
So they had all the data about who the person was that was collected independent of whether they were going to be a CEO or CFO or not. And then they were able to see which ones became a CEO and how they did.
Okay.
So you as a leadership specialist, what would you think the conclusions that came out of that data-driven analysis was? What makes for a really good CEO?
Oh, okay. So I haven't read the paper, but I would guess, depending on when those data were collected, that it's adaptability to change and being able to react and respond quickly to chaos in the VUCA environment.
Okay.
What's the answer?
That is close to one of the answers. It's so one of the aspects is they tend to be very decisive, but they also tend to change their minds. They adapt really quickly. So it's like, we are going to take that hill there. Yeah. That's the hill we need to take. Everyone line up. You're either coming with me to take that hill or you're off the team. Yeah. So let's start charging at it. And you get halfway there and like, nah, we're going to do that hill instead. And we're like, okay, well, sounds like he knows more about what he or she's talking about. Let's go take that hill. Yeah. So they're very, very decisive, while at the same time not being stubborn, being adaptable. So that's definitely, I think one of the characterizations. Anything else that comes to mind?
Well, I would think sort of the opposite for the CFO. So you don't want your CFO to change their mind really quickly. You want them to be really data driven and make decisions methodically based on data. Maybe the other thing that comes to mind for CEOs is a certain amount of charisma to get people behind those changes or the mission or the vision, especially if you're adapting and making changes. You have to sell it, right? Because you've just sold them to go to the first hill. And now you're like, oh no, just kidding, that hill. Yeah.
That's less so the case. In fact, that's one of the counterintuitive outcomes of the survey. And, so a lot of what people, think when you think about what makes a good CEO, you think, charisma, get people to buy in, kind of be a really good communicator. Yeah. Those are the kind of things that come to mind.
And that didn't come out.
Pretty much, I wouldn't say the opposite of those came up, but those weren't a distinguishing factor between a successful CEO and someone who wasn't a successful CEO. And if you think about it and say, well, that doesn't make much sense, because I would have thought the same thing. Then think about who are the greatest CEOs of our generation. Yeah. And what characteristics do they have? Are they great communicators? Are they great consensus builders? Do they have a lot of charisma? Maybe, depending on what you count as charisma, but when you think of the Mark Zuckermans, the Jeff Bezos, the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musk, that's not how you'd go about describing them. You wouldn't say like, boy, is that a great communicator, or boy, is that a consensus builder. Like, you'd be like, they're not those things. In fact, in many cases, they're flawed people by those kind of characteristics. They aren't kind of strong in their interpersonal skills per se, but there's something else. And the study, what came out of it was, when you put it in perspective and compare it to those kind of individuals, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. So what was the thing instead? I changed my mind. I no longer think that's important. So what was the other thing that came out?
Well, determination's huge.
Yeah.
Intellect, and he defines each of these based on the data, where intellect kind of captures certain attributes, like they just tend to be exceptionally, smarter than the average person.
Interesting.
That they can see things, sense things.
Is that because of the emphasis, like all of the examples you gave are tech examples, which I know that's your world. But if you look at outside of tech, of course, people are going to have a really strong intellect. A lot of them are founder CEOs, and you're talking about high tech, but what about, in other industries like?
Yeah, the study was, the data was from private equity type firms, which was not tech focused. So the data, the sample base, it was a big sample because it was collected over years and years and years. So it was, it tended to be privately backed CEOs across lots and lots of industries, so they can seek an outcome, like what makes for a successful CEO. Well, what is success? Yeah, success is return on investment. They had a really good outcome for their investors. So it's not a subjective measure of success per se. It's an objective measure. Did they achieve a above normal outcome?
So I bet as a successful CEO yourself, it's hard to read anything or hear anything about CEOs and not think about yourself. Did what you read or heard ring true for you in your career?
Yeah, well, some did. Let's start with the flaws. Was I a great communicator? No. Did I have a strong EQ? No. Was I a consensus builder? No. Was I, was I decisive? Absolutely. Was I willing to change course? Yeah.
Yeah, a few times, right? You took the company private, back to public.
But even like strategically, even when you're like in the middle of stuff, can you adapt quickly? So quick decision-making processes. So in many cases, I'd say, I mean, I think it's hard to say because overall, it's not what you would consider like a bunch of flattering terms when they're describing what makes a great CEO. It's, some are flattering. Was I always considered to be intelligent? I mean, that was one of the, when you talk to people who were my investors for a lot of years, I mean, that's one thing they always say is you just operate at a different level intellect-wise than, the CEOs, most of the CEOs in our portfolio. So they would see that as well. But it is interesting in that when you answer that question to the positive, you are also acknowledging your weaknesses at the same time. And, and I think, you don't have to have those weaknesses to be successful. So it wasn't like they were saying, if you are a good communicator, you are therefore not going to be successful. It's that the correlation between successful outcome and that attribute was very low. So, most of them were strong there, but it wasn't a differentiator. So it was, that's where the data was kind of drawing on what are the differences that drive correlation, not just what might, an individual be strong at. So, painful to admit all that, but let's get back to your story. And before I move on to kind of your broader story, let me ask one or two more questions about the Institute. Roughly how many students are involved with that, and how do they become part of the Institute? Is that something they elect into, or do they have to?
Yeah, so that's one of the big things we try to do is get students excited about leadership. So we created an app where students can log on and, tell us about themselves, and the app will tell them what leadership programs are right for them. Because that's part of the problem at school like CU is, we have 30,000 undergraduates, and that means we have, so many different programs. And a student might want to get involved in leadership, but not know where to go. So the app would say, are you an engineering student? Then maybe, and based on other, do they like long walks on the beach? Maybe they should go to the engineering leadership program. So we try to get them into programs that sort of fit for them. Because if you're not in ROTC, then it doesn't make sense that you'd go knock on ROTC's door. Yeah. And so total right now, based on our affiliates, we have about 8,000 students of the 30,000 on campus who are actively involved through the Center for Leadership. Some of those are direct, like the students who do our coaching program, and some of them are in programs that are our affiliate programs that we support their students indirectly through their programs.
And the direct ones, how many?
The direct ones, we're talking 150 students, much, much fewer. We have a much bigger impact through our affiliate programs, which in a lot of ways makes sense because what leadership development is going to look like for an engineer, it's going to be different than ROTC. So those programs are best poised to support their students. Mm-hmm. And then we try to take sort of students who want more. So they're in the ROTC program or the Scripps leadership program, that's through athletics. They're doing great. And then we offer, I think, maybe to the leaders of leaders, additional programming for those students who want, like, this is not enough, I want even more, will be the students who we end up getting at the Center for Leadership.
So those 150 students that are directly involved, do they get special attention during recruiting processes? Have companies learned to target?
Yeah, absolutely. Students? So leadership is one of the top competencies that companies are looking for, which always makes me laugh because then they're hired in and they don't lead anyone right away. But I think, there's so much data outlining the leadership gap in organizations. Yeah. And there's a big decline in even younger people's desire to be in a leadership role than when we were like our generation. Everyone wanted to be a partner.
First, I want to say thank you for calling us as the same generation as each other.
We're probably born in the same decade, I'm going to say.
I don't think so.
I think so. We can check later. But even things like being partners in accounting firms and stuff, the interest has gone up. Or in law firms, like there's just this shift.
So in Zayo, I started a program that was modeled after a program that really got my career launched. And if you had this leadership academy going then, I would have had my team target that program because we would bring people in primarily from CU to be part of a leadership development program. And we did that for multiple years. And so many of the individuals who went through that program became leaders at Zayo. And now so many of them are leaders across the industry.
That's huge.
It was hugely successful. But we had to work hard to try to find people who, were the right type of candidates.
Yeah.
But boy, we could have short-circuited that by saying, you know what, just go to that leadership academy and find students from within that group because that's what we were looking for.
I'll definitely reach out to those people who they still exist at Zayo.
I don't think they have that program anymore at Zayo. So
really,
no luck
need
there.
It. I mean,
yes, they do.
It's hard and our students, they have a jump start. They're not, maybe they're not they're not going to be a CEO tomorrow. And, some of them do, like some of our more entrepreneurial students go off and start their own companies. And, but the difference is their readiness to make sense of leader development opportunities. So when they leave, they are already poised to learn from the experiences that they have. They've been doing it their 4 years at CU. And if they got into your leader development program as a young, new employee, they're like grabbing those opportunities, but also integrating it into their overall, like who they are, their identity, I guess, who they are. And I think that's huge, right? There's so many people who are like, oh, I'm not the leader type, or I don't know if I want to raise my hand for this opportunity, but our students are like, they're hungry for it. And I think that's like half the battle is just getting people who are excited to take on challenges and have a learning orientation. Like, I want to learn new things. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of people that companies are looking for.
Yep. And you asked me before we started the podcast, why did I start doing a podcast? And one of the primary objectives is to inspire, podcast listeners who see, great people doing great things in Colorado to say, hey, I could do something too. You know, I might model myself more after those 2 or 3 guests versus some other ones, but I'm hoping this is a source of inspiration for those who are ambitious and want to be leaders across a lot of different dimensions to have that extra motivation and confidence, to grow into that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about you in the current tense before we go backwards in time. You're also a professor in the business school. So tell us about what you specialize in there. And
so it's real shocking. I am in the Department of Leadership and Leadership and Information Analytics is our group. So we have a lot of people who are doing work on leadership and kind of the human skills. We teach the classes on human resources and stuff like that. And then we have a bunch of big data people recognizing that, that's kind of where the future's going. If you can't make sense of data, it's going to be harder for you to do any kind of job.
Or easier because AI could just make sense of the data for you.
Maybe, yeah. But you have to be able to make sense of it.
Data in your orientation to
I think that's
even
right.
fully exploit that.
Yeah, but also being able to differentiate between kind of good data and bad data, especially with AI, because AI can only make sense of what you put into it. So if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So, and we have lots of classes helping students to understand AI and what it means. And
what in the last short period of time, call it year or two, academic, school year, how quickly has the AI that's affecting us outside of the university, how impactful has the change been with students as they're going through their studies in the university?
So I probably don't know the truth of this because I'm not a student, but in my impression as a faculty, I think it's completely changed everything that students do. Like I cannot give an assignment without expecting that students are going to turn in something that's been either generated by AI or at least tweaked by AI, have them help their writing or punctuation or whatever. So just like for them doing assignments, I think it's huge. And then also on the faculty side, every faculty meeting we have, there's some conversation about AI. Like, are we going to use tools to scan for AI and stop students from using the AI to write their papers? Or should we in fact be like, they're going to use the AI to write their papers, but they're going to use the AI to do their jobs. And so maybe we should be teaching them how to use
without a doubt
the AI. It's there. I mean, it's everywhere. I think it's
be like not letting students use the internet after internet took off, saying
right.
It's like what would be the advantages of that?
I know.
Yeah, it's
but then on the flip side, we still want them to be critical thinkers. So we want to teach them critical thinking and how to think critically while using the internet. Okay, so you use the internet as an example. I can't tell you the number of students who are like, well, I read this on the internet about, that CEOs should be charismatic. Like, yeah, you can read that on the internet.
Yes.
And, your study you referenced showed that wasn't as true. So it's the same thing with books. Like anyone can write a book. Does it mean that book is the gospel? No, you need to be a critical thinker and be able to differentiate kind of good data from bad data, good science from not science.
And good writing from not good writing.
Well, you just pump it into AI and say, make this good, right?
In fact, you just sparked an idea that I might play around with. I'm printing a book, it's going to get published in a couple of months. I may ask AI to rewrite, a chapter.
Yeah,
start with the first chapter. It's okay, AI, here's all the reference sources. Here's the chapter that's already written. Go rewrite it and see what it comes up with and kind of compare.
Do you think it's better? Especially if you can
we'll find out maybe.
Feed in best-selling
I'm a little scared.
and say, make this chapter more like chapters that sell well, maybe. I don't know. It's kind of scary. But
maybe I'll publish 2 versions of the book. One is as is and the other is AI enhanced and see what goes on.
That
might be fun.
You can do it. Click testing. How do people like it? Do they get more out of it? Yeah. I don't know. I think it's everywhere. And I work with a lot of companies and businesses, and they're using AI for every step of, from the human resource process to figuring out how to write job descriptions, how to scan resumes.
Yeah.
So you're no longer writing your resume for a person. You're writing your resume to be selected by an algorithm.
Yep.
It's huge. Training. And the only thing that I would say we toss around a lot in the leadership field is like, do we need leaders, or can we just like train AI to do it?
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, I'm of the camp that AI is going to create a major advancement in humankind.
Yeah.
With some dangers, but there's going to be major enhancement, regardless of if the dangers of AI prove to be something we can't control.
Right.
But in the meantime, humankind 10 years from now is going to look very different than humankind today. And that's a profound reality that we're staring at. I mean, profound. I mean, it's the nature of humankind is going to go through, that's happened many times in the past, but never over this short a period of time that we're about to experience. This next 5 years to 10 years, what humankind looks like after that period versus what it looks like now is going to be just completely different, almost unrecognizable, except for the fact that we'll go through that. So it won't, it won't be like we're looking now and we went to sleep for 10 years and you look again and say, what happened in the last 10 years?
So
but it's going to be so different.
You've thought about this. What do you predict as one or two of the changes that we're going to see?
Oh, well, I do think that the big categories of how people spend not just their professional or personal lives are going to change dramatically. So it's going to, this is going to be both stressful for a lot of people. It's also going to create opportunity for a lot of people, but it's going to be, you have to almost reinvent what your life is all about, because what it was in the way the world exists today might not be relevant 10 years from now, depending on what your profession and what your interests are. But a whole new world is going to open up for those who want to take it and can take it. And, and this applies to both, very skilled workers and, less, skilled professions. So it's interesting that one of the first professions that's under stress is people who program, because all of a sudden those who are really good at programming could do the work of lots and lots of people using AI, and therefore a lot less jobs seem to be, available all of a sudden. Like, who would have predicted that?
Wouldn't the programmers just program the next AI algorithm to, like, don't you still need the programmers to create the AI or better the AI?
Not as clear as the statement sounds, because what's happening in the creation of AI is, as I understand it, is you have these gigantic kind of computing farms, data centers filled with these very advanced computers, and you're feeding them with as much data as you possibly can put in there, constrained both by power and constrained by how much data can you really have. But then the AI is taking over from there. You don't have computer scientists then telling the AI what to do.
Right.
The AI is like, thanks for your help, thanks for getting us started. We're now going to go figure out what we can to make sense of this information, and we're going to do it through a process that you humanoids can't even tell what is we're doing inside the bowels of AI. So you can't even go to the parent who created the AI and say, okay, what exactly happened there? They'd be like, I don't know. It's just we fed it this. This is the kind of stuff it's doing. How it came to its conclusions, we can't even trace. We don't know how it did, and it could get more and more. And that's basically 2 years into this sudden change in AI. What's that going to be like 3 years from now? Let alone
I know you can only
10 years
imagine.
from now. So I don't know. I mean, the fact that there's already less demand for computer science jobs is like crazy. I mean, 2 years ago, there couldn't have been enough of those. There couldn't have been enough people to fill the job openings. Now there's a little bit of, not that they're out there, not finding jobs, but the fact that they have to look for jobs is a very different thing. And that's just one example. There's a lot of examples in the creative fields. We talked a little bit about that, but there's stuff that a creative, person can do who's very adept at AI that otherwise would have taken teams of people to do.
Yeah.
And so how does that play out? But in each of those statements isn't, oh my gosh, we're going to have nothing to do as humankind. It's that what you're going to do is very vastly different in the future than it was in the past. And the change is going to happen so quickly. Some are going to adapt and it's going to be like, whole new waves of opportunities, but a lot of others will struggle to adapt. I mean, that's just the nature of the situation.
Yeah. A couple years ago, one of my colleagues, Kai Larson, and I taught a PhD seminar about, it was basically a statistics class. And he was using these algorithms to, make predictions. And so one of the things we had it do was predict who's going to die in next week's episode of Game of Thrones. I'm like, how would it know, right? There's a writer, in Hollywood writing this, like, how would it know? But based on whatever we pumped in about who the characters are, who died last week, how much screen time each person got.
Including little clues and
I guess so. There's little breadcrumbs. I don't know what data it used. I think one of the predictors was if someone had like a big increase in screen time. So it's not one of the main characters, although I've never watched the show, but I understand they kill main characters all the time. But if someone all of a sudden becomes a main character, they're about to get eaten by a dragon. And it could predict with pretty good accuracy. And it would tell you how confident it was in its prediction.
Yeah. So this is probably a good, example of the changes taking place because of AI. Like if you were looking to do that in the past, you'd have an analytical person, a computer programmer, data analytics, and they'd be like thinking about, look for this factor, look for that factor. Right. So it would be giving a lot of instructions to the computer about, what to look for and how to find the correlations. With AI, you just say, watch these 10 episodes, and based on what you watch these 10 episodes, tell me the next person that's likely to die. And you don't have to tell what to look for. You don't have to say, here's what I mean by die. It'll know what dying means and what that looks like on film. So you just give it the data, in that case, in the form of just the video. Watch the video, and what you're looking for is kind of, you're using the data to predict who's the next character to die, and with astounding accuracy, it would be most likely be correct. Right. And then you'd be like, well, how did it know that? What did it do? And the person would give, I'm like, I don't know.
I don't know. Why?
It kind of just, looked at like every permutation of every piece of data, like the examples you said, it looked at that and, a gazillion times more, and just started to pick up on whatever the most pronounced clue might be.
Right, exactly.
And it might be something totally unexpected. Episodes. It might have been like, turns out, maybe the director didn't know it, but the next person to die always seems to be wearing blue. So, they find something that would seem to be totally uncorrelated, or maybe they pick up on stuff that, we might pick on as humans, saying, hey, it's probably more screen time. Look for that first. Like they'll figure out where the correlation really is there, and how to most likely predict the outcome, which is crazy.
It is. It's interesting.
Think about that. And that's why,
So what is the next episode of this podcast going to be? What would AI say?
That's a good question, because we haven't decided yet. So
you think you haven't decided? We should probably do
some of those experiments and see if have it predict, but let's not look at it.
Could tell you.
So not look at its prediction, but then we'll make our selection and see if it predicted right or not. Because it would be hard right now, because our pattern of like how to predict is still, for ourselves, we're still making up stuff.
That's what you think.
But before too long, there'll be something going on there. So tell us how you got to where you got. Give us your story. Why did you end up at CU?
3 minutes.
How did you end up in, heading up the Leadership Institute? I know you've done a lot in the world of kind of diversity inclusion. Where's all that coming from? So
I interviewed you about your inclusive leadership and all of the high-level women executives you had at Zayo, which was very unique. The number of women you had on your board for that time was just unparalleled. But I don't know. So I think when we look back on our lives, we come up with this like very nice narrative about how I ended up in this room at this time. And it was all very planned, right? AI could have predicted it. In reality, I think it's just like totally random that how people find themselves where they are. I think it's luck, decisiveness maybe. But here's the nice narrative, is that I just love leadership. I chose my undergrad college, Claremont McKenna College, because they had a leadership center.
And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles, right outside of East LA.
Okay.
I'm a first generation college student. I grew up really poor. Everyone in my neighborhood, I'm Mexican American, was Hispanic, or there was a large Asian American community as well. But not, I guess, the typical upbringing for a college professor.
Yeah.
Like my husband's a college professor, his dad's a college professor. How do you become a professor? It's like if your parents are a professor.
Yeah, that seems a really strong correlation between,
There might be this for tech too. I see a lot of like awesome tech leaders, and I'm like, oh wow, how'd you get involved in this? Well, my parents invented the supercomputer, so great. But that's what I chose this little college in California because it was one, close to home. I didn't know why anyone would ever leave California because you're already in California. Like, where else would you go? It's like, you got the best. But
do you feel that way now that you're experiencing Colorado?
I still kind of feel that way.
Really?
I love Boulder, and there's things about it that I don't love, that it's just like not, this isn't, sorry, Boulder Bureau Chamber of Commerce. It's just not very diverse. And growing up in Los Angeles, it's super diverse. And then from there, I moved to Houston, where I did my PhD at Rice. Super diverse. And so that still kind of bugs me. Maybe it'll become more diverse, but I just think life is more interesting and we're more creative, and our lived experience is better when we're immersed in a diverse culture and environment.
Yeah, Boulder's kind of it's obviously not very diverse. And there's a lot of economic barriers that will stand in the way of that changing quickly. But it's also one of the least prejudiced areas I've ever experienced.
I know, that's what everyone says. But I think it's easy to be not prejudiced or, when there's no threat of having to deal with people who are different from you.
Yeah, that's probably true. But at the same time, I grew up in areas where everyone was prejudiced.
Yeah, right.
And when the doors were closed, and you're having like a dinner, people would not hesitate to say stuff that.
Where did you grow up?
Just south of the city of Chicago, like 10 minutes outside of the South Side.
Yeah.
But there was, we were part of the Italian crowd, so there were the Italians, there was the Hispanics, there were the blacks, and there was Polish, and everyone that I was exposed to had very strong, bias, and often that would come out in ways that were not just, I don't understand the culture. It was the nasty kind of stuff, and it would go every direction. I suspect, but you never behind closed doors here. I'm never with anyone here where someone says something because they feel like they're in a safe environment, so they say something that is highly inappropriate or even tiny bit inappropriate. It just doesn't happen. So
no, I think it's the other extreme. It's like, how dare you ever imply anything that's not totally PC, right? Like there's no safe zone to ever say anything like questionable in Boulder. And I don't know, I guess I feel like it's a more of a value statement. We value that.
I'm hearing people talk more today and more openly today than even a year or two or three ago around like your ability to say something wrong 2 or 3 years ago was a lot higher than your ability to say something wrong today, meaning you could talk about things that I think are common sense discussions that people should have where you're not as threatened of kind of stepping on a third rail by having kind of a innocent conversation, but saying the wrong thing or using the wrong words and being ostracized for it. But man, if you go back 2 or 3 years, 4 years, I mean, that was like no period of time I experienced in my life where, the being just a little bit sloppy with words could get someone in lots of trouble. And it was like, okay, how are we going to operate as people communicating if everyone's so worried about saying the wrong thing that they stop communicating, which is what was sort of happening.
Yeah, I think that's around the time when Inclusify came out, 2020, 2021. Mm-hmm. I think there was real heightened consciousness and awareness around DEI and diversity. And But I don't need to pick on
Can I
Boulder.
can I go off on a little bit of tangent
Yeah.
and tell you a story about that?
Yeah.
So this is when I was CEO of Zayo, and it was and some of what I say here might be a little bit like inappropriate. I don't know.
It's okay. It can be edited out, right?
Yeah. So it was the first time Juneteenth kind of came onto the scene. I'm sure it was around a lot longer than that, but it was when all of a sudden Juneteenth was a thing, and a lot of us didn't even know what people were talking about, including me. So we started to understand what it was, and and I wanted to do something special as it was approaching. So, I announced to the company that we're going to have a special hands meeting that's associated with Juneteenth. So I had 3 friends that were these were Black. I don't know if they were all African American, but they're all and very accomplished. None at Zayo. One was a CEO of a company in Atlanta. One was, I think, on our board at the time, but had a really great background in investment banking and took companies public as CFO. And then one was an investor out of San Fran. So we, had them in. I think this was probably during COVID, if I remember right. So it was probably in the context of all hands. Oh, no. This was live in person. So it must have been 2019-ish. Had a great discussion. Well, I get this nasty note from an employee. They say, "I can't believe that you did that." And I'm like, okay, I never heard of the employee before. I'm like, I'm happy to get on a Zoom with you and understand what it was that I did so wrong. So this kid, and it was a kid, it was like, I don't know, 23 years old maybe, recent graduate from CU.
Oh.
A white kid who brought another 2 people to the conversation. One that seemed to be somewhat aligned with him, and one was, was a also young African American kid who seemed like he wanted nothing to do with being part of that conversation, but was dragged into it. And then I got lectured by this 23-year-old for how irresponsible it was for me to do that when I told the whole company we were going to do something special. Like, well, what'd you want us to do? He's like, I wanted you to give us all the day off. You should let us all have a holiday day so that we could go on our own and do what we wanted.
Yeah.
Like, well, we have unlimited days off. Like, did you take the day off?
Yeah.
It's like, no. I'm like, so you didn't take the day off, but you're mad at me for like having kind of a conversation with people who had to live their life through this, and it was the strangest thing. I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen.
You said you weren't communicative. You listened to a 23-year-old complain about not getting a day off on Zoom. When he had all the days off he could want.
He wanted me to give that particular day off to everyone, and he was mad that I hosted like a group and had them talk about their experiences as in the professional world as coming from
Did you give him the day off next year?
I don't think so. I think by next year it was like that might be 2019, COVID. And then 2020 was COVID. So pretty much, that was the era when everyone took every other day off. So who knows?
Yeah.
I don't even know if he stayed with the company. If he was walked up here, I wouldn't even know who he is. But I'm like, if anyone, and I know what, and he kept saying that I had a privileged background, like kept pointing his finger at me. You're a product of privilege. You're a product of privilege. I'm like, you don't know what my circumstances and where I came from. And I'm like, and I certainly didn't go to CU Boulder. So, and you did, because you just graduated from CU Boulder. Aren't you a little bit more privileged than maybe?
It is a privilege to graduate from CU Boulder.
Yeah. So anyways, a little bit of a tangent, but that was a big eye-opening experience for me. And like, boy, something is shifting here, and I don't quite know what it is, but it was pretty weird.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyways, back to you.
So
LA.
Where am I? I grew up in LA. I went to study leadership. I did my undergrad honors thesis on leadership. I think everything's leadership. For everything good that happens in the world is the result of leadership. Maybe more importantly, everything bad that happens in the world is the result of poor leadership or evil leadership. It's like someone made those decisions to, like whatever, lock everyone down or not lock everyone down.
Yeah, I think that's, if I'm understanding what you're saying, there, for good or for bad, there's a collection of people who are leaders who really are shaping kind of world events in the world we live in.
Yeah.
And if more of them were good leaders and less of them were bad leaders, maybe
we'd have a
things
better
would have
world.
better. Yeah.
And then there's studies that show, unlike the study you referenced, that CEOs don't really drive corporate profits. They're much more strongly driven by market factors and changes. And so you could say, maybe they don't matter that much. But for me, I just always really believed, and sometimes they call it the romance of leadership. It's like people who really believe that everything is the result of leaders. And I guess I feel that way. And it's leaders with a big capital L, like CEOs, but also leaders, just like people who take the time to invest in others, who, are mentors, who show up for their community. Those just like those little things when, and if you look at what's happening in Florida right now, there's always those folks who go out of their way to take in people who've lost their house or all of that. It's just like, it's not just being a good person, but it's like stepping up and having agency to say, I can do something, rather than like, wow, it kind of sucks what's going on with them.
Yep.
So then I went straight from my undergrad and did a PhD at Rice on leadership. I did a master's on leadership too. And I went to University of Wisconsin for a couple of years, and then I came to Colorado.
And when did you arrive in Colorado? What year was that? Roughly?
2006.
2006. Okay.
How about you? When did you arrive in Colorado?
Well, I arrived here in 98.
Okay.
But we started Zayo in 2007. So as we were getting ready to start Zayo, that's kind of when you arrived.
Yeah, exactly. I started it all.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you did.
Yeah. And I really wish I had learned to do something else. Like maybe I should do something else, but I still really believe in leadership, and looking at at CU students. They just have enormous potential. You've hired more of them than anyone. They're more interesting than maybe some other students I've met along the way. I'll always ask my class, like, what do what's your story? And they're like, well, I was in the Olympic trials. I didn't make it. So I decided to come get a business degree. And I'm like, okay, like, what have I done lately? Right. Yeah. Or this one woman in my class last semester, she started buying and selling property in San Diego. And just as when she got out of high school, her parents gave her property, and rather than live in it, she sold it and just like she just like became this property mogul. And I'm like, and why are you here? She's like, I wanted to get an entrepreneurship degree. I'm like, okay. They're just cool. And it's not just the business students. I mean, if you go now at the Center for Leadership, we get to interact with students all over campus, and they're like just doing great things, humanitarian efforts, a lot of people who've come out of the military and come back for degrees. They're just like so interesting. And if we could take those students, the 30,000 or maybe the 27,000 who are good eggs, and give them a little bit of an edge, I feel like we can flood the world with all these brilliant, fantastic leaders. And that's my hope, I guess, for my contribution to the world, is to shape these leaders who will make everything better.
Yep. Well, that's ambitious. That's a high
just
hope.
Like a little goal.
So I've begun to know the new chancellor. I knew the old chancellor as well. Yeah. What's your feelings about how that's going to change the course of the university?
It's such a hard question, because the previous chancellor, he's my chancellor forever, because he's
still working with you on
so Chancellor right? Phil DiStefano.
Yeah, I ran into him. He told me he was still
he and I share an office in the Center for Leadership. It's like, talk about leadership lessons. I get to sit next to Phil, who was chancellor for 15 years. Most chancellors are probably chancellor for 5 years. It's like, that's a good run. Same thing with like deans. It's a tough job, and you make enemies. If you do a good job, you make enemies, right? Because not everyone likes everything you do. And I don't know, Phil's just extraordinary in his leadership. So I'm trying to learn through osmosis. Like if I just follow him around all the time, maybe I'll pick up some tips and tricks. But and he did a lot for leadership on campus. At the same time, Justin Schwartz, who's our new chancellor, I think it's like he's an innovator. He says he's a disruptor. And because he hasn't been here for 15 years, and actually Phil was at the university for 50 years.
Yeah.
He has just like a wide open playing field to make changes, to do things differently. And, I'm sure some people will struggle, but I also see CU, and CU is a great school. I've already said it, we have great students, right? But we're not the top university for undergraduates in the country. I think we have the potential to get there, and I think I think he'll hopefully move us in that direction, like challenge people to be innovative and
because what CU Boulder has is it has things that most other schools can't ever
they can't replicate it.
They can't replicate it. I mean, it sits here not just in Colorado, but at the foothills of the mountains. Beautiful, beautiful setting. Integrated into such an innovative and entrepreneurial and creative community. Not just directly in Boulder, but spilling into Denver. I mean, you have that. Certainly you have that. In the San Francisco Bay Area with Stanford, the way it's attached to Palo Alto. So there are other examples of that, but it's almost undeniable that CU Boulder is in the top 10 starting points of if you had to have a location for a university, a vibe for a university, how would you stack rank that? And CU Boulder would be near the top of that list, certainly in the top 10. So you have almost this thing to work with that others would have to overcome. How many entrepreneurial universities are sitting in an area surrounded by cornfields or in a state that isn't known for having much innovation.
Right.
Here you have a ton.
I know. And we're investing a lot in quantum and being a center for quantum. Mm-hmm. And then, the sustainability, that's one of Chancellor Schwartz's big foci is sustainability, which, Colorado as a state is really leading the way in sustainability and things like green energy and wind and solar. And so how perfect to have a university that's training people. It's hot jobs. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, top jobs, we talked about people losing jobs because of AI. There's a big increase in demand for jobs and sustainability in corporations, but also in nonprofits and government. So it's something where
space tech. I mean, the aerospace industry and space tech industry in Colorado is right up there with anywhere in the nation and the world.
So many astronauts. This is not just like a TV commercial for CU, but my kids' scout troop would have astronauts come by and just talk. I'm like, who scout troop gets astronauts to just sit there with 12 kids? There's so many astronauts or former astronauts. I don't know if you're an astronaut forever in Boulder because of that space program too.
But I do think, as much as the university has going for it, it could get on a different trajectory in terms of really building toward being, one of the top destinations.
I think we're not that hungry. We're all like, oh, it's really nice. I should go get a hike in today before ski season starts.
I do think I would describe it a little bit differently because I do think we're not as ambitious as we need to be.
Yeah.
But I don't think ambitious is competing with, I want to go get a hike in. I think those compete off each other. That was always, when people looked at Colorado in general, when it came to building companies, that was, if you go back 10, 15 years, that's what a lot of the pundits would say. It's in Colorado, the employees won't be as serious.
Yeah.
They won't be as dedicated. They care more about outdoors and kind of their lifestyle than they do about building something. And I think we've proven that to be not true.
Fair.
The amount of interesting companies that have been built and are being built in Colorado is extraordinarily impressive by any standard other than maybe Silicon Valley. And it's not because people who live here are less interested in lifestyle. It's that it feeds off each other. And I think the same could be true with CU Boulder but I think the ambition, not just ambition, because everyone would agree, we want to be that, but the kind of ambition that changes behavior, that really pushes people forward, that allows leaders to kind of emerge and say, we're going to lead that charge, and we're not going to worry about bringing everyone with us every step along the way because it won't make much progress.
Thanks for saying that. I think that was too harsh. We work hard, and we just have the opportunity to hike. It only takes like 10 minutes to get to the.
So I got to get a car and drive for 4 hours.
Yeah, exactly. So that's good.
But I do think you were onto something about there needs to be kind of this level of ambition that is different than it's been in the past. And there's a DNA kind of progress, cultural progress that needs to exist there, that you're really wanting.
I've heard this from a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think you've said this too, but some entrepreneurs are like, I have to succeed because I cannot fail. Like, I have no alternative. And that's the thing that makes them successful. Is like, it's this or bust. And so
even if they have plenty of alternatives, it's more,
it's more the mindset.
It's a mindset, and it's not a mindset that you kind of just, pretend or convince yourself.
No, it's something. True. Yeah.
And a lot of times it comes from darker places too. It's like, I do not want to fail. I would rather, literally die than fail. It's like, really? You'd rather die than fail? Like, where's that coming from? And that's how a lot of the most extreme, not just entrepreneurs, extreme successful people. Yeah. If you had to, set sail, hundreds of years ago to try to discover the new world. Yeah. I mean, you're basically saying, I'm so driven to do this that there's a good chance I die and never come back. People are going up into space. I mean, we had a conversation recently. I think maybe some of the people on the team were involved with. It's like, would you go to space? Like, if there was an opportunity to go and colonize, Mars or the moon, would you do it? And I'm like, not only would I say no at this phase of life, I'd say no even looking backwards 20 or 30 years ago. I'm not going to get in some piece of hardware and get shot off of Earth and end up somewhere and try to make a life. But people have done that, or that's how we've expanded. It's in the human nature. But it takes a special small percentage of us to say, I'm going to risk everything. I'm going to accept odds that probably mean it's not going to work, but I'm going to do everything I can to make it work. And then some of those, break through.
Yeah. I think from a human evolution standpoint, you need some small percentage of the population to be that way, but not everyone, or it ends the human race.
Problem. Most have to look for leaders to help them get from here to there. But, certainly you need the leaders as well. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, there's, leaders is a given, but what proportion are good leaders versus not good leaders? But even cultures, I mean, the same individual can be viewed as like an exceptional leader by one culture, and the opposing culture view that person as like a terrorist. And
oh my gosh, I worked at this big accounting firm that they were losing a ton of human capital because they weren't promoting their executives who were Asian American into leadership roles. And so they were leaving, and they were performing really well, but they just weren't seen as leaders. They didn't fit the stereotypes or prototypes of what the current partners and executives saw as like leaders look and act like this. They're charismatic, they wear a suit, they're X, Y, and Z. They can work a room. And then the company got a big client that was in Asia, and they had lots, and this company in Asia was like, you don't have anyone on your team who exhibits leadership. And they're just like, well, what do you mean? Well, but leaders, and this, maybe it sounds stereotypical, but this is coming from them. Okay, it's not my story. Should be quiet and listen. And they had all of these other stereotypes, and it just really showed them like, wait, we're just operating based on a meaningless Western prototype or ideal for what leaders should be. And it's not a universal truth. It's just that's what we're used to kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I could relate to that because I know in the earlier and very formative years of my career. So, this is before Zayo, but it was kind of a company called MFS, and then Level 3. The characteristics of being a leader were aggressiveness,
like
not good
presence.
things. Like not good things, and very, very much stuff we would associate with being a white male. And that's just the way it was. You have to work your ass off, lots of hours. It was okay to be, to not be a team player. It was okay not to communicate. I mean, it was, in fact, the attributes that are associated with that type of behavior is what got people ahead.
Yeah.
And it was very much, it was a sign of maybe the times. It was also a sign of, we were like looking to do huge things across lots of different dimensions. But it was also clearly a set of attributes that weren't balanced,
Right.
that, we might have thought they were at the time and say, look at us, how great we are. We're a bunch of people who behave this way. It's like, yeah, you are a bunch of people that behave that way, and you shouldn't feel real proud of it because it was somewhat,
well, it worked for them, right? That's the problem. It's hard to prove people wrong when they're like, but I experienced this firsthand. I'm a great leader, and that's how I am.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's we didn't invent that. That was much more broad. But when you have a chance to look backwards and see that, it does makes me cringe. And I'm sure it makes a lot of people around me cringe too. Like, man, that was us, and we could have, I think, accomplished the kinds of stuff we accomplished, and not have behaved in that as a group in that kind of narrow of a way, because there wasn't balance. There wasn't an opportunity to be contributory in a main way if you didn't behave that way, or so it seemed.
I'll give you a yes and, because I feel like that's not my style of leadership, and that's not the prototype that I've adopted in my own life. And here's the but or the and or whatever. Maybe that is what that was needed at the time. Mm-hmm. And it made sense in the environment. And maybe there weren't skilled leaders who led in a different way, the way there are today.
Yeah, that is true. That's true. It wasn't like there was another set of ways of doing
People
things.
Just standing outside the window looking in, who couldn't get there. I don't know. We weren't as there wasn't as much equality for women. There wasn't an expectation, or I don't know how people would react to a leader. It was like, I really just want to hear what you have to say and how you feel.
Yep.
Employees might react like, this person's nuts. Like,
that person's soft.
This is this is therapy.
They need to go get their job done.
Are we trying to change the world here? Yeah. So I tried to I don't know, maybe that was the right thing at the time, and being adaptable is the thing that predicts.
Yeah, I don't think there was an alternative to that.
Yeah.
If you wanted to be part of, I'd say, success in the industry, because it wasn't just us; it was the whole industry worked that way. And but I think society's progressed in that way. It's not as true now. Well, it was pretty true in Silicon Valley 10 years ago, but even Silicon Valley, I think's come a ways.
It's changing. And so what's cringe is the people who hold on to it today. And they're like, but that's the way I've always done it. And it's like, I always use this coding kind of analogy of like, do you not update your coding language? You have to keep updating and growing. And it worked for you then, but are you using DOS? No. So
what did you have to overcome in your journey to get to where you are now?
The big first hurdle for me was just growing up in relative poverty. Like, my family was on welfare. I had to get a job, and like lots of people get jobs, but I had to get a job to pay for my college applications when I applied to colleges, and to pay for my SATs and all these things that it's like, I don't think that's typical, right? When my kids apply to college, we're just going to pay the whatever, $50 or whatever it is. So that was really tough. And then I think I carried that feeling different with me, especially I went to, small private college. It's an amazing college, but the Claremont McKenna College, but the majority of students don't have that background. Yep. And I think we get that at CU too, kids who are first gen or from rural areas, they feel like different, maybe less than, Yep. So I think I had to not just get over it, but I had to deal with that. And at some point,
there's probably less support structure for that in those days than there is now.
Oh my God. Yeah. There was just not an awareness of there were no extra supports. We do a lot.
How close were you, if at all, to not going to college because of those hurdles?
Oh my gosh. So my parents did not want me to go to college.
Really?
Actively, which my mom was like, I love my mom. She lives in Boulder. But like,
hopefully she doesn't listen to
she
podcasts.
doesn't know what a podcast is. And one of her friends might, but she just thought it was like, why do you want to be better than other people?
Yeah.
I'm like, I think there's a misunderstanding there. I don't want to be better than other people. I just want to be better. Like,
Yeah.
I love learning. I want to be better, know more. It doesn't make me a better human. Like, I still try to do good in the world either way, but I think I could do more good if I, took
Develop
this.
your skills and your potential.
Right, exactly. Like, how much good am I going to do without launching my career, without having a career? But even that was kind of like, why do you want this career? It was like, there wasn't the same equality for women. So I think my mom's thought was, you should get married and you should live at home. That was the other thing. Like, to go to college, I had to move out of the house, which my mom was very scandalized for me to go live in a dorm. And there was like boys there. I was like raised Catholic. You shouldn't move out of your parents' house till you move into your husband's house, is what she said. I'm like,
wow.
Yeah. Whoa. That's very different than the world today. Right. But I don't know if I hadn't gotten into, this Claremont Mechanic College, or I got into Berkeley and UCLA, I think I would have, no matter what, found a way, even if I went to our local community college and took classes until I could go to college, because I love learning things. And I would say, like, consume hundreds of books. I can't wait to read your book. I just like love learning new things. I have all these thoughts like, I think I should get a law degree. People are like, why? I'm like, well, wouldn't that be cool to like get, and I haven't done it yet, but I did contact professors at the law school. Like, can I sit in your class? They were not that keen on it. But I feel like that is a genetic gift, or just like somewhere a gift that I acquired, that if you are so hungry to learn, school just makes sense because it's a place with lots of books and you can learn. So I don't know if I would ever have not gone to college, but I think that was a big hurdle. And I see it with our CU students, when some students are studying for their exam and other students, I'm like, well, have you studied? And they say, well, I have studied and I work 40 hours a week because I have to pay for school. So they study what they can. And I would say the same for me in college. Like, I studied and I did well, but I had to work to pay, like literally to pay for my books. That's just a very different college experience than some of the kids.
We actively support Greenhouse Scholars, which I'm sure you've seen, because a lot of those students, go to CU, and very, very high graduation rate. I think everyone graduates and goes through Greenhouse Scholars, even though they come from very difficult circumstances for the most part. And I actually had the founder and the head of the board for Greenhouse Scholars here doing a podcast. So it's one that's already been dropped. Yeah, so it's good to hear. Even though we've supported a long time, I didn't really know the full story, and it was nice to be able to use this long form podcast so that you could go deeper and explore.
You can see how your support is so important to those students' success, because that scholarship means they don't have to work 40 hours, so they can give all of their potential. Although I do think people should still work, but
and they get support as they're going through kind of and that's it's if you don't have support, it's got to be so much easier to give up. You hit a hurdle and you look around and your family doesn't really want you to go to college anyways. They want you to come back home and help out and do this, and or they want to be supportive, but they don't really know how because they haven't gone through it themselves. So having kind of another support structure around to help navigate when something goes wrong or when you get frustrated or stressed out, it makes all the difference.
It's huge. That's what I think of, like with our mentoring program. So our mentors, this is the Boulder CU Leadership Program. If anyone wants to sign up, but we're going to call you.
All right.
But it's just like one more person. Some of this, for students, they say like, well, my parents might not understand how hard this is, but my mentor does. And the mentor takes them out to dinner and
So I one thing I'm unable to do is be one-on-one mentor for folks, but our team definitely is and can be. And but definitely spend, as you know, kind of time in general with students to help them in different ways, but more from a kind of, in group activities as opposed to one-on-one. One-on-one is just not scalable.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah. But definitely we support, especially of kind of leadership organization in general, the 150 version, the ones who are dedicated to, maybe we could do some stuff, working with that group as a group.
That'd be great. We'll bring them all here for a big podcast.
Yeah. We had here just about 3 months ago, 40 members of the football team.
Oh, yeah.
Meeting with about 12 different leaders of kind of companies. And
cool.
The message was, as you're playing through your football career, we want you to think about staying here.
Yeah.
Not going back to where most of them weren't from Colorado, not going back from where you came from, but to stay here. You're welcome, and we'll help you kind of get transitioned into the professional world. And it was, we got really strong reviews from the students. They're obviously, that grouping was football players, so they're obviously really busy this time of year, but we're hoping that leads to more of them reaching out and saying, hey, I'd really like to take you up on it. Can you help us get matched up with the company and getting close to graduation or whatever? And
we work a ton with the student athletes on campus because, well, so one, there's so much leadership involved in sports, right? You're leading your teamwork, leading people on field communications, imperative, but also they just know how to work. They work so hard because they're at a D1 school like this. Their training schedule is so intense that they do that and they go to school. And it's depending on your major, it can be pretty rigorous. So companies love them. And I think CU does a good job, and they've tried to do more to invest in those students because they're giving so much to the university. And so it's, about their lives too. We want to give back. So make sure that they get something great out of this degree.
Yep. We also said we don't think we just did it for the football. We did it for athletes in general on a separate occasion. Yeah. This one hosted on campus, but we brought about 10 tech CO types and got together in one of the big rooms that were part of the stadium. And, similar thing, a bunch of small round tables. We get athletes from across the different sports programs. Probably 30 or 40 of them showed up, and it was awesome.
So are you a big sports fan? Do you go watch the games?
I do. I am a big sports fan, but I have not been a big college sports fan. I'm a big NFL fan. I'm a Cubs fan in baseball. Go to a lot of Nuggets games. But I haven't gone to some of the CU games. I'm going to go tomorrow night. We're filming this on a Friday, and there's a game tomorrow night. And so it's a late game. It's like an 8 o'clock game, but we'll be there.
Dion's so mad about those late kickoffs.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he keeps complaining. So I try to go to the games, but I can't. It's hard for me to stay awake that late. I have little kids. I got to put them to bed.
I think we're going to be in the business school suite this time.
Nice.
Yeah, we're in the chancellor's presence suite a few weeks ago, and I think we're going to be in the business school one this time. So get to build up there. Yeah. So, well, what else? What else did we not cover?
Well, we didn't talk about Inclusify, but that's okay.
We can talk about Inclusify.
Inclusify.
What is Inclusify?
Inclusify is my Wall Street Journal best-selling book.
Oh, of course. Yes,
on
of course.
How leaders can create more diverse and inclusive organizations. You're featured in there.
I am?
Yes. You don't know this is terrible. Your team signed off on it. Just the work you did at Zayo with women on your board.
Really?
Yeah.
How come I don't know this?
You do, but it was a while ago.
Oh, well, I got to get a copy of the book and
I should
take a look
write
at
you
it.
a copy. We can exchange book copies. And
can I talk about something that's a little bit of I don't know. The word equity has turned into a very divisive word.
I feel like it's a red herring, or it's just I want to pick on something.
I don't know, because I feel that way personally. I feel like it's been, I can almost remember when it first came up. Yeah. And it was in the same period of the story I was talking about earlier. And, someone used the word equity. And I'm like, do you mean equality? No, equity. I'm like, how is equity different than equality? And I can't remember what words were used to explain at the time, but I'm like, okay, I guess, but I'm not sure I really understand that. But what it's come to mean to a lot of us including me, is something that builds the opposite of values that are so deeply imprinted on us. That is, everyone needs the opportunity to succeed, but to give people the notion that the outcome will be equitable sounds a lot like socialism to a lot of us. It's like, are we describing kind of, Marxism here? Or are we describing kind of, the culture that we've all grown up in?
Yeah. I'll give you a really different view on it, I think. And I did a survey at some point that was looking at people's views. And it was a while ago. So it was pre-COVID, 2016, 2017. People even then had a lot of problem with the word. The way I talk about equity.
And I don't think that word made it into the world I was in 2016, 2017.
No, I think at that point.
Yeah, it was shortly thereafter is when it started to pop on the scene.
Yeah, and D&I moved to DEI, right?
Yeah.
The way I see equity is giving people what they need to be successful. Equality might be giving everyone the same thing to be successful, but
I think that's a fair distinction, a very fair distinction.
So if you give people what they need to be successful, it means you don't have to give everyone the same benefits, let's just say. Instead, you use cafeteria benefits because, some people might have a parent who's aging and needs employee benefits to support their parent. Other people might have young children. If you're like me, you have an aging parent and young children. But I think the idea that's why I guess it resonates with me, because I feel like good leadership is not, let's just treat everyone the same, because people are different. And if some team members on my team need more explanation, others, they don't really want the details. They just want to go. Some people want, how was your weekend? Oh, tell me about your family. Other people are like, oh my God, don't ask me about my family. I don't really want to tell you my life story. I just want to go into work and get the job done. So I feel like equity is actually a natural way, an intuitive way that I think good leaders lead, is they form relationships and they
treat people as individuals, not one formula applies to everyone.
Yeah. And that's how I guess I see equity.
Yeah, but that's not the way a lot of people talk about equity,
though. That's the way people have framed it in order to give something to attack. Equity is unfair treatment, giving people extra because they don't deserve it and they didn't earn it. And it's like, we give everyone different things that they need to be successful. If there's no, and I think you have this at Zayo, like, if women aren't signing up for the women's leader or aren't signing up for leader development, maybe you create a leader development program for the women in your office because you want them to go and they don't want to go. Or if women don't have informal mentors because they're not going out and asking people, will you be my mentor? Maybe you set up a women's mentoring program. And is it that you shouldn't give men mentors? It's like, if any men want the mentors, you can give them mentors, but they all have mentors. So we need to give women mentors because they don't naturally have them.
I feel like what you're describing when you're describing it is how to be a much more effective leader.
Yeah.
Much more effective person.
See, now you love equity.
Yeah. But the word equity has really been different for a lot of us, for me, because the word equity seems to have, I would have never have articulated the word equity in the way you did.
Yeah.
But I also don't, when I hear you say it, I don't say, oh, that's what everyone means when they talk about equity.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not what I hear when people talk about equity either. When they talk about equity, it certainly sounds very different than what you're saying. And it sounds much more divisive, much more like much more a discussion about, the outcome needs to be the same regardless of how you got there.
I don't think that maybe there are people who believe that, but I did this huge project with NASA, and it was, what we did was remove, it's like not rocket science. That's my fun for today, but we removed the names from applications to apply for telescope time on the Hubble Space Telescope. And now they use it on James Webb as well. A lot of people had that fear, like your goal in this is to have an equal number of men and equal number of women get telescope time. And that was like the red herring, maybe that's not the right word, but that's what people would say. You're just trying to make it just as many women. And it's like, okay, no way is that ever going to happen. Something like, 12% of the applicants are women to begin with. How would we ever expect that 50% of the award recipients would be women? It doesn't make any sense. We're trying to make the process equitable. And so by removing the names, you can't favor one group or the other. Mm-hmm. A lot of companies do this on resumes too. So we're removing barriers, not trying to cheat the outcome. Did it cause a massive increase in the number of women who got telescope time? It did. But can you say that was unfair? No, because there were no names, right? But people still say that. This is like somehow a scam to stack the deck for women.
Yep. So you've worked with Google as well on some leadership, if I remember.
Yeah, I've done some Inclusify stuff for Google, for NASA. I worked with the NFL.
NFL, I saw that. So what did those projects look like? And they were, you say related to Inclusify, which I assume means related to the book, but or do you use the word Inclusify to mean something broader?
No, it's just like inclusive leadership.
Okay, so it's the name of the book, but you're talking about, when you say Inclusify, you're talking about kind of that being the topic or approach. So tell us about what those endeavors are like.
They're all kind of similar to the NASA project of like, let's find ways to improve systems, to support leaders to be more inclusive, or even what that means. There's a lot of focus on selection for me, hiring or bringing people in, because if you don't bring people in, then you can't develop them or, have fair and equitable performance evaluation systems if you don't ever hire them. So that's like a good starting point, I'd say. I'm trying to think if there's one like kind of interesting case study or story. And then I guess, this is my summary. I feel like so much of it is just like the conversation we just had around equity. It's just like, because of the divisiveness I feel like we have in our society right now, people can't even have conversations about, do we want to change the way we hire people? No, because we don't want to be unfair.
Yeah. Okay, so that surprised me that you said specifically that. Is it hard to have conversations? Is it uncomfortable? And is it much more risky?
Yeah.
I think all those are true, but I don't think the kind of leaders that I spend time with, which is a lot of leaders, I would be shocked if any of them were of the nature they say, we just don't want to make a change.
Yeah.
It's how do we do this in a responsible way? But I'm concerned because something could go wrong here. Yeah. AI is going to pose a whole set of opportunities and set of challenges, because in some ways, AI used properly can not know if it's a man or a woman, but AI also could on its own, because it's looking at like all the data and it's using all the data to come up with what is its view of the best answer for something. But if there's some hidden stuff within the data that causes bias, which you would probably say there probably is.
Yeah, of course.
Well, that can perpetuate biases as well. And so how do you tackle that? It's going to be a really difficult, set of challenges as you look forward in time.
Yeah. For sure. So it's interesting that you say that about the leaders that you hang out with. It's because you hang out with awesome leaders. So, and that's what I found in Inclusify. So I met with you. I interviewed Mark Benayoff from Salesforce, and the CEO of, General Motors, who's Mary Barra, and Dan Schulman, all these leaders. And they were like, no, you just do it because it's the right thing to do. And you just tell people they're going to do it. And it's important. And that's.
Yeah, but I can't speak for other ones, but I can speak for myself. It is difficult though, because our board was, as you said, it was, balance
Yeah.
between men and women. Yet most people in our industry who would have had the kind of experience to be on a board, would not have been equal men, women. In fact, when I sold Zayo and the new owners then named the board, you want to know how many of them were female?
One.
9?
1?
Zero.
0? That's terrible.
And do you know how many of them were something other than white?
0.
I think 1.
Asian?
Kind of Middle Eastern. And they didn't even realize that until everyone accepted the positions. And like one investor looked at the other and like, we need to get some diversity on the board. I'm like, you guys do realize that the board that existed before you guys took over was half women and half men. And we have to work hard to do that.
Yeah.
But if you work hard to do that, you end up, in a better place, certainly a better place than
a
bunch of people who all look the same.
That's got to be disheartening after all the work you did.
It was disheartening. And I'm like, they didn't ask, it wasn't like they were asking my opinion or my perspective. They were just bringing on their cadre of people so that they could, make sure the votes were kind of the way the votes were or whatever they were thinking. But it was about as the opposite of diversity as you get. And then they had to figure out what to do about it. It's like, we just filled all our positions. Now what do we do? And
add a 10th board member. That's what a lot of companies do. So I think there's that challenge, but then also translating it down. So the board is something the CEO will have a lot of involvement in, but they're not hiring people at director level, right? So I think that's where things get tricky is you can say this is important and you're saying it to your leadership team. And the leadership team's communicating that to the VPs or the presidents of divisions, and the presidents communicate. And at some point, people are just trying to get their job done.
Yeah.
And then they may, be trying to move quickly, which is when we see bias most likely to emerge. You're trying to fill the board with people you got to get a certain number of people who are from the different investment groups in there, and you just start putting people in slots, and you're not spending the time to make thoughtful decisions about what's actually going to create the best team. And it's not checking boxes. Like we want to have 5 women because that's what Zayo used to have. But it's about having a team that's going to make really good decisions. And we see, depending on the study you read, lots of studies show that you make better decisions as a board when you have different perspectives. And that includes gender.
I was a big believer that one, you have to take a long-term view. You can't just take an immediate view. And part of the long-term view is who's joining the company. And the leadership program that we described earlier is like we would work extra hard such that if anything, there was a greater quantity of people of some type of diversity, because there is a reality that more women will drop out of the workforce for periods of time for cultural reasons, and therefore if you start with equal numbers, you're going to end up unequal before too long. And if those are, if that's the group of people you want to, as a group, emerge as future leaders of the company, you got to start there, because if you're just bringing new leaders in who don't represent broad diversity, you're just adding to the problem at that point.
Right.
But you got to work hard to do that, because
I know you told me you were out there forming relationships and doing the legwork. Not all the CEOs are willing to do that. So
and
that's
not
why
everyone on your team is willing to kind of pitch in. That's one thing I learned too, is like, some people all over it and they amplify your efforts, but some are just stubbornly like, hey, I just need the best people to do the job, and I'm not going to put in that extra time to try to find the appropriate people that represent more diversity. Because a lot of times the easier thing to do is just hey, here's qualifications. The pool of people who know how to do that is largely white male, and the ones who might represent diversity, they're being recruited hard by others. So if you don't recruit hard, they're going to end up somewhere else, and you're even in a worse position. Right. So, but a lot of them just, a lot of people that worked for me over the years, some of them leaned all over that, and some were just like,
I think
I'm too busy for that, and it was
the narrow, short versus broad and long-term view. Yeah. Because hiring the best person, and we see this a lot with entrepreneurs too, you just replicate yourself over and over again. But that actually is not the best team. Like, you don't want 5 quarterbacks or 5 CEOs on a team. Mm. You need the CFO. You need the people with different views to make really creative, innovative decisions.
So when was Inclusify published?
Oh my gosh. It was November 2020.
Okay. And what's your next book?
I don't know. I think
You haven't started yet.
I haven't started. So I have an agent. I don't know if you have a book. I have a book agent. He's like, all right, it's time. It's been 5 years. It's like the book's getting dusty on the shelves. So you got to do it now. I don't know. I'm not going to tell. I'll tell you secretly later what I'm thinking. But
okay.
I think there's newer. I will say that I don't know if I'll write another book, but I think the challenge right now for leaders, there's lots of challenge. AI is a challenge. Polarization is a challenge. But I think the challenge that leaders need to be focusing on is employee well-being, and not because they're nice and we want a workplace with happy people who go hiking at the lunch break, but because of the stress and anxiety and depression that we're seeing, the World Health Organization's reporting across the globe post-pandemic. It's diminishing organizational effectiveness. If you have people who are absent, coming in late, not paying attention, quitting, the number of people who've exited the workforce in general, just like I'm quitting for no other job, I'm done, is hindering companies' ability to be profitable and effective. And so leaders who can create a workplace where people feel like they can thrive and they want to go and they don't just want to quit are going to have a huge competitive advantage. And you ask leaders, well, how do you do that? They're like, I don't know, because they all went to school when we went to school. And they're like, no one talked about well-being. It's like so goofy. But today I think it's going to be a huge competitive advantage for leaders who are able to help employees thrive.
Yeah. I mean, we have a small team now. Obviously, I used to manage really large organizations, but we have call it 10 to 12 person team, depending on how you count. And, the amount of attention that, we put into, we want this to be an environment that people want to show up and they want to be part of, and they want to make a long-term home for themselves. And we want people who want that, which is a different statement, because there's certain people who want a job, but they don't really want those other things. Yeah. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for somewhere they could go during certain hours, they get paid and leave. And okay, we're not trying to make this an environment that's suitable for anyone. We're trying to make it one that's optimal for people who have ambition, have creativity, are trying to do something with their professional life, but want to do it in an environment that's, that has attributes that look different than a normal workplace. So I've turned into a much bigger believer that as I was later in my career than I was earlier in the career, when it was like, who cares? We're too busy working to worry about any of that kind of bullshit. But now it's like, that's not only do you need to do that to attract and retain talent, but you accomplish more as a team, right? If people have that in their daily atmosphere and culture. And it's I think there's a higher quest there than certainly I understood when I was younger.
Yeah. Well, if you agree, then now I think it's a good route to go.
Yes.
For my next book.
So we do got a little clue there. Great. Well, thanks so much for doing this. And I look forward to spending more time with the leadership program at CU and supporting that. It's, I didn't know, I've heard about it, but didn't know that much about it. And I think you could probably give a little credit to your former chancellor and continued business partner, because I ran into him recently and he was telling me a little bit more about it and said, I'm still staying involved with it. And I'm like, I got to reach out to Stefanie and understand that a little bit better.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you for having me, and go Buffs.
Go Buffs. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Yay.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars featuring Stefanie Johnson. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Courtney Caruso with support from Kendall Weinberg, Allie Berman, Emily Reed, and Gibson Siegert.